The first thing you needed to understand about Black Hollow was that Mercy didn't live there anymore. Maybe it had once, back when the town was young and hopeful, when settlers still believed the frontier rewarded hard work instead of just taking everything you loved. But by the time Eliza Boone became a widow at 23, Black Hollow had calcified into something meaner. People survived by deciding who deserved help and who deserved to drown. They made those decisions fast, and they rarely reconsidered. Eliza knew exactly which category she belonged to. Saturday morning light came thin and cold through the market square, turning everything the color of old bones. Eliza stood behind her bread table at the far edge where vendors went to disappear, arranging loaves she'd baked at 3 in the morning because the boarding house owner charged her extra for using the kitchen after dawn. Her hands were red and cracked from kneading dough in water she couldn't afford to heat. Her dress hung loose in some places and tight in others because she'd sewn it herself from fabric. Mrs. Grayson at the dry goods store had sold her at charity prices, which meant old curtain material at regular cost, while the woman smiled like she'd done something noble. Nobody looked at Eliza directly. They glanced. They registered her presence the way you'd note a water stain on wallpaper. Unfortunate, vaguely embarrassing, not worth addressing. Women gathered around other tables, laughing and trading gossip, their baskets bumping together in comfortable proximity. They bought bread from Mrs. Chen, who charged more and baked worse, because Mrs. Chen's husband hadn't died and left her nothing but debt, and a stillborn son people whispered about in the boarding house hallways. Eliza told herself she didn't care. She told herself that every Saturday. She was lying every time. "Morning, Eliza." The voice came from her left. Agnes Hartwell, the closest thing Black Hollow had to a proper healer, though people only called her that when they were desperate enough to forget she'd never had formal training. Agnes was 70 if she was a day, weathered like driftwood, with eyes that had seen too much of what people were capable of when no one was watching. "Morning." Eliza straightened a loaf that didn't need straightening. "How's your hip?" "Angry." Agnes leaned against the table edge, taking weight off her left side. "Made a poultice that smells like Satan's boot, but it helps. You're looking thin." "I'm fine." "That's what people say when they're not." Agnes picked up a roll, examined it with the focus of someone evaluating gold ore. "This is good bread, girl. Better than anything else in this market." "Doesn't seem to matter much." "No," Agnes said quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." Across the square, Martha Drummond and Susan Parrish stood near the fabric table, their heads bent together in conversation. Every few seconds, one of them would glance toward Eliza, then away, then back, like they were confirming she was still there, still worthy of whatever they were saying. Martha's daughter, a pinch-faced 16-year-old named Caroline, wasn't even pretending to be subtle. She stared directly at Eliza while her mother talked, her expression somewhere between pity and disgust. Eliza felt heat crawl up her neck. "They're saying I should leave," she said, keeping her voice flat. "Heard it from Mrs. Brennan at the boarding house. They think I'm, what was the word? Unsettling. My presence makes people uncomfortable during a time of mourning. Your mourning or theirs? Does it matter?" Agnes set the roll down carefully. "Your boy died 4 months ago, Eliza. You're allowed to still be standing in the same town where it happened. Try telling them that." "I have. They don't listen to me either." Agnes pulled a coin from her pocket, set it on the table. "I'll take 2 loaves, the dark ones." "You don't have to." "I'm buying bread, not offering charity. There's a difference." Agnes's expression softened slightly. "You're going to be all right, girl. It doesn't feel like it now, but you will." Eliza wrapped the loaves in paper that was too thin, tied them with string she'd salvaged from a previous customer. Her throat felt tight. "How do you know?" "Because you're still here." Agnes took the package, tucked it under one arm. "That's how I know." She walked away before Eliza could respond, her limp more pronounced than it had been 5 minutes ago. Eliza watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling something crack open in her chest. Not grief exactly, more like the absence of something that should have been there. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of what hope used to feel like. The morning dragged forward. Eliza sold 3 loaves to people who didn't speak to her. She sold 1 to a ranch hand who counted out coins like he was doing her a favor. She sold nothing for 45 minutes straight, while women bought vegetables and fabric and cuts of meat from vendors who smiled at them, who asked about their families, who treated the simple act of commerce like it was a conversation between equals. By 11 o'clock, her feet ached and her lower back had started that familiar throb that meant she'd been standing too long. She'd learned to ignore it, the same way she'd learned to ignore the whispers, the stares, the careful distance people maintained whenever she moved through a crowd. Then the screaming started. It came from the north end of the market, near where the road turned toward the mountain pass. Not a shout, a scream. Raw and desperate, the kind of sound that stripped away everything civilized and left only panic. The entire market went silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Hands froze over merchandise. Even the children stopped running between tables, their small bodies going still with the instinct prey animals have when something dangerous enters their territory. Then everyone moved at once. People pushed toward the sound, some motivated by curiosity, others by that strange human need to witness catastrophe. Eliza stayed behind her table, rising on her toes to see over the crowd, her heart kicking against her ribs. Through the mass of bodies she caught glimpses. A man on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, covered in trail dust, something in his arms. The crowd parted reluctantly, and Eliza saw him clearly for the first time. Caleb Mercer. She recognized him even though they'd never spoken. Everyone in Black Hollow knew Caleb Mercer the way they knew about dangerous dogs or unstable bridges, as something to be avoided, respected from a distance, never engaged with directly if you had any sense of self-preservation. He was 30, maybe 32, with dark hair that touched his collar and a face that looked like it had been carved with angry tools. Scar tissue traced a line through his left eyebrow where someone had split it open years ago. His jaw was set so tight, Eliza could see the muscle jumping beneath the stubble. He wore work clothes that had once been decent but were now stained with God knew what, and his hands were shaking. He held a bundle against his chest, wrapped in what might have been a blanket, but looked more like a shirt someone had torn apart and stitched back together wrong. The fabric was stained dark in places, lighter in others, and small enough that Eliza's stomach dropped before her brain caught up with what she was seeing. A baby. Caleb dismounted without grace, nearly falling, catching himself against his horse's flank. His eyes swept the crowd wild and unfocused, looking for something, someone, anything that might help. "Please," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "She needs... I can't... Someone has to..." He couldn't finish a sentence. The man people called dangerous and violent and untamable couldn't string together enough words to explain what was happening, and that was somehow more terrifying than anything else. Agnes pushed through the crowd, moving faster than her hip should have allowed. "Let me see." Caleb turned toward her like a drowning man seeing rope. He pulled back the makeshift blanket, and Eliza's breath stopped. The baby was dying. Even from 20 feet away, even through the crowd, Eliza could see it. The infant's skin had gone gray-blue, the color of bad meat. Its tiny chest moved in rapid, shallow gasps that didn't seem to be pulling in enough air. Its eyes were closed, mouth slack, one small fist curled against nothing. Agnes examined the child with quick, efficient movements, her face going carefully blank in the way medical people's faces did when they were looking at something terrible and trying not to show it. "When did she last eat?" Agnes asked. Yesterday, maybe?" Caleb's voice was shredding. "I've been trying to give her goat milk, but she won't take it. She's not strong enough to..." "How long since your wife passed?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His whole body flinched. 3 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eliza heard fragments. His fault. Wouldn't call the doctor. What did he expect? Caleb heard them too. His jaw tightened and his eyes went flat, and Eliza recognized that expression because she'd worn it herself 100 times. It was the look of someone who'd stopped trying to defend themselves because they'd learned defense didn't matter. People had already decided who you were. "She needs milk," Agnes said quietly. "Real milk. From a wet nurse." "Then find me one." Caleb's voice had gone hoarse. "I'll pay whatever. I have money. I can..." "It's not about money." Agnes looked past him toward the crowd of women gathered in tight protective clusters. "We need someone who's nursing or who recently gave birth." Silence. Agnes's gaze moved from face to face, landing on Martha Drummond first. "Martha, your sister just had a baby 2 months ago. She's still nursing?" Martha's face went rigid. "She's in Denver visiting family." "Susan?" Susan Parrish actually stepped backward. I, my milk dried up last year when I weaned Tommy. I couldn't. More silence. Agnes tried 3 more women. Each one had a reason. Too old, never had children. Milk gone, health problems, family obligations. The excuses piled up like stones, and behind each one Eliza heard the real reason, the one nobody would say out loud. They didn't want to help Caleb Mercer. His wife had died because he'd refused to humble himself and beg the town doctor for help after they'd had words about respect and payment and Caleb's tendency to settle disagreements with his fists. People said he'd been too proud, too stubborn, too violent to save his own wife. They said she'd bled out in their cabin while he held their newborn daughter and finally understood what his anger had cost him. They said a lot of things about Caleb Mercer. True or not, the town had decided he deserved what he got. And now his daughter was paying the price. Please. Caleb's voice had gone quiet, which was worse than the yelling. Someone. Anyone. I'm begging. Nobody moved. The baby made a sound, not a cry, just a weak mewling noise that barely qualified as sound. Its chest stuttered, caught, started again. Caleb's face was wet. He was crying in front of the entire town, this man they called dangerous, and nobody cared enough to help him. That's when Agnes turned. Her eyes found Eliza across the market square, and Eliza felt her entire body go cold. No. The widow, Agnes said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eliza Boone, she lost a child 4 months ago. She might still have milk. Every head turned. Suddenly, Eliza wasn't invisible anymore. Suddenly, she was the absolute center of attention, and it felt like standing naked in winter wind. Martha Drummond laughed. Actually, laughed. You can't be serious. Why not? Agnes's voice had gone sharp. Because Martha gestured vaguely in Eliza's direction, not quite pointing but making her meaning clear. Look at her. She's barely keeping herself together. You think someone like that should be responsible for a baby? Someone like what? Agnes asked dangerously. But Martha didn't have to answer because Susan Parrish did it for her, her voice dripping with false concern. We're just thinking of the child's welfare, Agnes. Eliza's been through such trauma. It wouldn't be appropriate to burden her with... The child is dying, Agnes cut in. Appropriate doesn't matter. She probably doesn't even have milk anymore, Caroline Drummond added, her young voice cutting with the casual cruelty only teenagers could manage. It's been months, and anyway, her baby died right after birth. Everyone knows something was wrong with it. What if she's, contaminated or something? The word hung in the air like rot. Contaminated. Eliza's fingernails bit into her palms. Her vision had started to narrow at the edges, black creeping in, but she forced herself to breathe through her nose and keep standing because falling apart was exactly what they expected her to do. Caleb had gone very still. He looked at Eliza for the first time, really looked at her, and she had no idea what he saw. A fat woman in a stained dress? A pathetic widow everyone mocked? Someone beneath his notice even in his desperation? She waited for him to turn away. She'd gotten good at waiting for that. Instead, he started walking toward her. The crowd noise swelled. Caleb, don't! This is ridiculous. Someone stop him before he makes an even bigger fool of himself. He didn't stop. He crossed the market square with the dying baby in his arms, his boots kicking up dust, his expression set in something beyond desperation. When he reached Eliza's table, he didn't speak immediately, just stood there looking at her with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted and completely empty of pride. Can you help? His voice was barely a whisper. Please. Eliza looked at the baby. 4 months ago, she'd held her own son for 7 minutes before he stopped breathing. She'd counted every second, 420 of them, long enough to memorize his face, to feel the weight of him, to understand exactly what was being taken from her. Not long enough for anything else. Not long enough to feed him or hear him cry or watch him sleep. Just long enough to love him and lose him in the same breath. She'd spent every day since then remembering that weight. Now, Caleb Mercer stood in front of her with a different baby who had the same gray color her son had worn at the end, and every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to not volunteer for this kind of pain again. But she looked at that dying infant and saw her son's face, and she couldn't walk away. Bring her to my room, Eliza heard herself say. The market square exploded. Women shrieked objections. Men shouted warnings. Someone, probably Martha Drummond, called her shameless, disgusting, desperate for male attention even at a time like this. Someone else said she was taking advantage of Caleb's grief, trying to trap him, using a dying baby to worm her way into a man's life because no one would want her otherwise. Eliza heard all of it. She looked at Caleb and said it again, louder this time. "Bring her to my room, now." He nodded once, sharp and grateful, then turned and started moving. The crowd tried to block him, but he walked through them like they were smoke, his shoulder checking anyone who didn't move fast enough. Agnes followed close behind, her cane striking the ground like a judge's gavel. Eliza abandoned her table, left her unsold bread sitting in the dust, and walked after them. Behind her, the market square buzzed with shock and judgment and speculation about what this meant, about what kind of woman would do this, about how it would end. Eliza didn't care. For the first time in 4 months, she had a purpose that wasn't survival. She had a child who needed her. Everything else could burn. The boarding house sat 3 blocks from the market, a sagging 2-story structure that Mrs. Brennan ran with an iron fist and a perpetual expression of disappointment. Eliza's room was in the attic, the smallest, hottest in summer and coldest in winter, with a ceiling that sloped so dramatically you could only stand upright in the center. She paid $7 a month for it, which was $3 more than it was worth, but Mrs. Brennan knew Eliza had nowhere else to go. Caleb took the narrow stairs 2 at a time, not waiting for permission, not asking if this was allowed. Agnes followed more slowly, her hip protesting every step. Eliza came last, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. When she pushed open her door, she found Caleb standing in the middle of her tiny room looking lost. The baby had started making sounds again, not crying, just small, distressed noises that didn't sound like they came from anything living. "Here," Eliza pointed to the chair near the window, the only real furniture she owned besides the bed and a crooked dresser. "Sit." He sat. She knelt in front of him, her knees protesting against the rough floor. This close she could smell him, horse sweat, wood smoke, something metallic that might have been blood. His hands were shaking worse now, barely able to hold the bundle steady. "Let me see her," Eliza said quietly. Caleb unwrapped the makeshift blanket with movements that were almost reverent. The baby girl underneath was smaller than Eliza's son had been, maybe 5 pounds, with wisps of dark hair plastered to her skull. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was so shallow, Eliza had to watch for several seconds to confirm her chest was moving at all. She was beautiful. She was dying. "What's her name?" Eliza asked. Caleb's throat worked. "Ivy, my wife she said if it was a girl." He couldn't finish. Eliza reached out carefully and lifted Ivy from his arms. The baby's weight settled against her chest, and something inside Eliza's body recognized it immediately. Her breasts, which had been tight and aching for weeks, suddenly felt hot and full. Her arms knew exactly how to position the small body. Her hands remembered this. "I don't know if I still have milk," she said honestly. "It's been 4 months since my son—" "Try," Caleb whispered. "Please, just try." Agnes had positioned herself near the door, giving them privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. "She'll need to— You should probably look away, Caleb." He stood up fast, nearly knocking over the chair, and turned to face the wall. His shoulders were rigid with tension. Eliza unlaced the front of her dress with fingers that trembled. This should have felt shameful. A man in her room, her body exposed, Agnes watching like a medical examiner. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing she'd ever done. She positioned Ivy against her breast and waited. Nothing happened. The baby's mouth hung slack. Her head lolled to the side. She didn't have the strength to latch, didn't even seem aware food was available. "Come on," Eliza whispered. "Come on, baby girl. You can do this." Still nothing. Panic started rising in Eliza's chest. She looked at Agnes desperately, but the old healer just nodded once. "Keep trying." Eliza adjusted Ivy's position, brought her nipple directly to the baby's mouth, tried to coax a response. "Please," she breathed. "Please try." Ivy's lips twitched. Then, so slowly it almost didn't seem real, they parted. Eliza felt the small mouth close around her nipple, felt the weak pull of suction, and suddenly her body responded like it had been waiting for this moment. Milk let down in a rush that was almost painful, flooding into the baby's mouth. Ivy choked, coughed, then latched again. And this time she drank. Behind Eliza, still facing the wall, Caleb made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. His shoulders shook. Agnes exhaled slowly. "Well," she said, "I'll be damned." Eliza couldn't speak. She stared down at Ivy's small face and watched color start to return to the gray cheeks. Watched the baby's chest begin to rise and fall with more strength. Watched a miracle happen in real time. For 4 months, her body had been producing milk for a child who would never need it. She'd bound her breasts and tried to dry up, but her body had refused. Every morning she woke up leaking and aching with milk that had nowhere to go. Now she understood why. Ivy drank for 10 minutes before falling asleep, her tiny mouth going slack around Eliza's nipple, a thin line of milk trailing from her lips. She looked peaceful, almost healthy, like maybe she'd live after all. Caleb turned around slowly. His face was wet. She's eating," Agnes confirmed. "That's more than she was doing an hour ago." He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees beside Eliza's chair, and looked at his daughter with an expression of such raw relief that Eliza had to look away. It felt too intimate, too private. "Thank you," he said, his voice wrecked. "Thank you, I don't have words." "She'll need to eat again," Agnes interrupted practically. "Every 2 hours if she's this weak. Maybe more often." Caleb nodded. "I'll pay you. Whatever you want. Name a price." Eliza looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "I don't want money." "Then what?" She didn't have an answer. She didn't know what she wanted except to keep holding this child, to keep feeling useful, to keep experiencing this strange sense of purpose that had been missing since her own son died. Agnes cleared her throat. "Caleb, you should head home, get some rest. Come back tomorrow." "No." He stood up fast. "I'm not leaving her. She needs to sleep. So does Ivy. You hovering won't help." "I don't care. I'm staying." His jaw was set in that stubborn line that probably got him in fights. Eliza could see the exhaustion pulling at him, the way his hands still shook, the hollow look around his eyes. When was the last time he'd slept? Eaten a real meal? Done anything besides try to keep a dying baby alive? "Go," she said quietly. "I'll take care of her tonight." Caleb stared at her. "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "But, Caleb," Agnes's voice cut through his protests. "The girl knows what she's doing. Let her do it." He looked between them, clearly torn, then back down at Ivy. His daughter slept peacefully in Eliza's arms, more relaxed than she'd probably been in weeks. The evidence was impossible to argue with. "I'll be back at dawn," he said finally. "Fine. If anything happens, anything at all, I'll find you." He didn't move, just stood there staring at his daughter like if he looked away she might disappear, like this was a dream he might wake up from. Finally, Agnes grabbed his arm and physically steered him toward the door. "Come on, let the girl breathe." They left together, Agnes muttering something about stubborn men and Caleb's boots heavy on the stairs. Eliza heard Mrs. Brennan's voice from below, sharp with questions and judgment, but she couldn't make out the words and didn't try. The door clicked shut. Suddenly, Eliza was alone with a sleeping baby in her arms and no idea what happened next. Ivy stirred, made a small sound, then settled again. Her weight was warm against Eliza's chest. Her breathing had evened out into something that almost sounded normal. Eliza looked down at the small face and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not grief this time, but something else. Something that hurt just as much, but in a different way. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of what hope used to feel like. Outside her window, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the boarding house below, people were talking about her, making assumptions, crafting stories that would be repeated and embellished and turned into facts by morning. Eliza didn't care. She had a baby to feed. Everything else could wait. Ivy woke screaming at midnight. The sound tore through the attic room like something feral, high-pitched and desperate, and Eliza jolted awake so fast she nearly fell out of the chair. Her neck ached from sleeping at an angle. Her arms had gone numb where the baby's weight had pressed against them for hours. For one disoriented second, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was holding a child that wasn't hers. Then Ivy screamed again, and everything came back. "Okay," Eliza whispered, struggling to her feet. "Okay, I hear you." The baby's face had gone red with effort, her small mouth open wide, her entire body rigid with hunger or pain or both. Eliza fumbled with her dress laces in the dark, her fingers clumsy with sleep and panic. The room was freezing. She'd let the small fire die hours ago, and now frost was forming on the inside of the window glass. She got her breast free and brought Ivy to it, but the baby was crying too hard to latch. Her head thrashed from side to side, her tiny fists beating against Eliza's chest in frustration. "Come on, sweetheart. You know how to do this. You did it before." Ivy didn't care what she'd done before. She wanted food now, and she was furious about the delay. Eliza tried repositioning her, tried calming her with gentle shushing sounds, tried everything she could think of while the screaming continued and her arms shook and exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. Finally, desperately, she started pacing the room while humming something that might have been a lullaby if she could remember the actual melody. It took 10 minutes before Ivy calmed down enough to eat. When she finally latched, the relief was so intense Eliza almost cried. She sank back into the chair and watched the baby's cheeks hollow with each pull of milk, watched her small fist uncurl and relax, watched the anger drain out of her tiny body. "There you go," Eliza whispered. "That's better, isn't it?" Ivy's eyes were open now, dark and unfocused, staring at nothing. She ate with single-minded intensity, like she was trying to store up against future starvation, like she knew how close she'd come to dying and wasn't taking any chances. Outside, Black Hollow slept. Eliza could hear the wind moving through the gaps in the walls, could hear Mrs. Brennan snoring 2 floors below, could hear the distant sound of someone's dog barking at shadows. Normal night sounds. The world continuing on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Eliza looked down at the baby in her arms and felt it again. That dangerous flutter of something that might have been hope or might have been delusion. She'd spent 4 months teaching herself not to want things, not to imagine futures that would never happen, not to let herself care about anything that could be taken away. Now she was holding a baby who would be taken away. Caleb would come back in the morning. He'd take Ivy home. Eliza would return to her bread table and her empty room and the careful numbness she'd cultivated since her son died. This was temporary. A few hours of usefulness before returning to invisibility. She needed to remember that. Ivy fell asleep with milk dribbling from the corner of her mouth. Eliza burped her, awkwardly, having to remember how, from watching other mothers in the boarding house, then settled her into the drawer she'd pulled out of the dresser and lined with her spare blanket. It wasn't a proper cradle, but it would do. She had just crawled into bed when Ivy woke up screaming again. This time it only took 5 minutes to get her calmed and eating. Eliza stayed awake afterward, watching the baby sleep, afraid to close her eyes in case Ivy needed her. The night stretched out like taffy. Every time Eliza started to drift off, some small sound would jerk her awake. Ivy shifting position, Ivy making small sleeping noises, Ivy breathing in a way that sounded slightly different than she'd been breathing 10 minutes ago. By the time dawn light started creeping through the window, Eliza had slept maybe an hour total, in fragments too small to count as rest. Her body ached. Her breasts were sore. Her eyes felt like they'd been rubbed with sand. She'd never felt more awake in her life. Boots on the stairs announced Caleb's arrival before his knock did. Eliza was already dressed, or as dressed as she could manage while still being able to feed Ivy quickly, when he pushed open the door without waiting for permission. He looked worse than he had yesterday. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in stubble that had crossed the line into almost beard, his clothes the same ones he'd been wearing in the market. But there was something different in his face, something that hadn't been there before. He looked at Ivy sleeping in her makeshift drawer, and his entire body sagged with relief. "She made it through the night," he said, and it wasn't a question. She ate 4 times, screamed her head off each time until she got fed, then went back to sleep like an angel. "That's..." His voice caught. "That's normal?" "I think so. I don't have much experience with babies who actually survive past..." Eliza stopped herself. "But yes, I think that's normal." Caleb crossed the room and knelt beside the dresser drawer, staring at his daughter with an expression Eliza couldn't name. He didn't touch her, just looked. "She has more color," he said finally. "A little. And she's breathing easier." "Yes." He stayed there for a long moment, watching Ivy sleep, his hands clasped between his knees like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. When he finally stood up, he turned to face Eliza, and something in his expression made her stomach flip. "I need to ask you something," he said. "All right. And you can say no. You should probably say no. But I have to ask anyway because I don't have another option, and my daughter is going to die if..." He stopped, gathered himself. "Come live at my ranch." The words hit Eliza like cold water. What? Just temporarily. Until Ivy's strong enough to take goat milk or until I can find a proper wet nurse from another town. A few weeks, maybe a month. I have a spare room. You'd have privacy. I'd pay you... Caleb, but I know what this looks like. I know what people will say. But she needs to eat every few hours, and my ranch is 2 hours from town, and I can't keep bringing her here in the middle of the night. The ride alone could kill her in this weather. Eliza's thoughts were spinning too fast to catch. You want me to move to your ranch? Yes. To nurse your daughter? Yes. While living in your house? In a separate room, he said quickly, with a lock on the door if you want one. I'm not asking for anything except help with Ivy. Nothing else. She stared at him. He looked desperate and exhausted and completely serious. He actually wanted to bring her, Eliza Boone, the woman the whole town mocked, into his home. The scandal would be nuclear. People will assume the worst, she said. They already assume the worst about me. What's one more thing? I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about what they'll say about me. Caleb's expression hardened. Do you care what they say? Did she? Eliza thought about the market women whispering behind their hands, thought about Martha Drummond's daughter calling her contaminated, thought about 4 months of being invisible and alone and carefully pretending it didn't hurt. I care about being able to come back when this is over, she said. I care about still having a place to sell bread and a room to sleep in. I don't have family here, Caleb. I don't have anywhere else to go. If Mrs. Brennan decides I'm too scandalous to keep renting from, I'm sleeping in the street. Then don't come back. She blinked. What? Stay at the ranch. After Ivy's weaned, I mean. I need help anyway. The place is falling apart. I can barely keep up with the livestock and the repairs and trying to raise a baby alone. I'll pay you a fair wage. Give you a real room, not some attic Mrs. Brennan charges you triple for. You'd have work, purpose, respect. Respect, Eliza repeated. From who? The people already say you killed your wife. You think they'll respect me for... I don't give a damn what they say about me. His voice had gone quiet and dangerous. But if anyone disrespects you while you're under my roof, they'll regret it. The certainty in his tone was startling. Eliza studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives, but all she saw was desperation and something that might have been sincerity. In the drawer, Ivy started making small waking up noises. She's hungry again, Eliza said. She's always hungry. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. Look, you don't have to decide now. Just think about it, please. Eliza lifted Ivy out of the drawer before the small noises turned into screaming. The baby rooted against her chest immediately, already learning the routine. How long can you wait for an answer? As long as you need. But Ivy can't wait. She needs you today. That's not fair. I know. He didn't apologize for it, though. Can you at least come to the ranch for today? I'll bring you back tonight if you want. Just give me one day to show you it's not as bad as you're imagining. Eliza looked down at Ivy, who had started crying in earnest now, her small face scrunching with displeasure. She needed to be fed, needed to be warm and safe and cared for. Needed things Eliza could provide if she was willing to take the risk. The door banged open without warning, and Mrs. Brennan stood there, her face pinched with disapproval, her arms crossed over her narrow chest. Mr. Mercer, she said coldly, I don't allow men in my tenants' rooms. Then stop renting rooms where people are dying, and maybe we wouldn't have to break your rules. Caleb didn't even look at her. Eliza, what do you say? Mrs. Brennan's expression went from pinched to furious. Miss Boone, if you leave with this man, don't expect to have a room when you return. I run a respectable establishment. Do you? Eliza surprised herself by interrupting. Is it respectable to charge me $10 a month for an attic with holes in the roof? Is it respectable to tell the other tenants not to speak to me? Is it respectable to, you ungrateful girl, after everything I've done for you, you've done nothing for me except take my money and make me feel small. Eliza's voice was shaking, but she kept going. So I'll make this easy for you, Mrs. Brennan. I'm leaving. You can rent that room to someone else, someone respectable. Mrs. Brennan's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. You're making a terrible mistake. Probably. Eliza looked at Caleb. Give me 10 minutes to pack. His expression shifted into something that might have been relief or might have been surprise. You're sure? No. But Ivy needs to eat, and you're right about the ride being too hard on her. So I'll come for today and we'll see about tomorrow. That's all I'm asking. Mrs. Brennan made a disgusted sound and left, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Eliza could hear her downstairs already, probably spreading the news to whatever tenants were awake. By noon, the entire town would know Eliza Boone had moved in with Caleb Mercer. By evening, they'd have decided exactly what that meant and exactly how to judge her for it. She didn't let herself think about that. She packed while feeding Ivy, which was awkward but manageable. Everything she owned fit in one canvas bag: 3 dresses, 1 pair of shoes with holes in the soles, undergarments she'd mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and the small wooden horse her husband had carved for their unborn son. That was it. 23 years of life reduced to items that weighed less than 10 pounds. Caleb waited by the door looking uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. When she finished, he reached for her bag and she let him take it. His fingers brushed hers during the transfer, and she noticed they were rough, calloused, scarred across the knuckles. Working hands. Dangerous hands. The hands of a man who'd broken someone's jaw once and probably didn't regret it. They left the boarding house through the back stairs to avoid Mrs. Brennan. Caleb's horse was tied outside, a big bay gelding that looked exhausted. There was a wagon nearby, too, old but functional, with blankets piled in the back. "I brought the wagon instead of riding today," Caleb said. "Thought it'd be easier on Ivy. And you." "Thank you." He helped her up onto the seat, his hand under her elbow, steadying her even though she didn't need it. She settled Ivy in her lap and pulled one of the blankets around them both. The morning was brutally cold. Her breath came out in white clouds. Caleb climbed up beside her and took the reins. He didn't say anything as they pulled away from the boarding house, didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances or explanations, just drove. They passed through Black Hollow's main street as the town was waking up. Eliza saw curtains twitch, saw faces appear in windows, saw Martha Drummond standing outside the general store with her mouth hanging open. The stairs followed them all the way to the edge of town. Then they were beyond the buildings, onto the mountain road, and the silence changed into something different, something almost peaceful. "How far is your ranch?" Eliza asked. 2 hours if the weather holds. Longer if it snows." "It's going to snow." Caleb glanced at the sky, which had gone the color of old bruises. "Probably." They rode in silence for a while. The road wound up into the foothills, past abandoned homesteads and broken fences and land that had defeated the people who'd tried to settle it. The frontier was littered with failure. For every ranch that survived, 5 others collapsed into dust. Eliza wondered which kind Caleb's would be. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why didn't you call the doctor when your wife was in labor?" His hands tightened on the reins. "Who says I didn't?" "Everyone." "Then everyone's a liar." His voice had gone flat. "I called him. Rode into town myself and begged him to come. He said no." "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Week before, I was in the saloon. Doc's son was there, drunk, running his mouth about my wife, saying she'd gotten fat, saying I must not be satisfying her at home if she needed to eat so much, saying—" He stopped. "Saying things I won't repeat." "What did you do?" "Broke his jaw," said flatly, like he was reporting the weather. "1 punch. He went down and didn't get up for a while. When he could talk again, he told his father I'd attacked him unprovoked. Doc believed him, or pretended to. Either way, when I showed up begging for help with Sarah, he told me to get off his porch before he called the sheriff." Eliza held Ivy closer. "So she died because I couldn't keep my temper. Because I put my pride before my wife's safety. Because I'm exactly what everyone says I am." He looked at her then, his expression empty. "That's who you're trusting with your reputation. Might want to reconsider." She should have been afraid, should have demanded he turn the wagon around immediately. Instead, she just felt tired. "Everyone in that town has decided who I am too," she said. "Desperate, pathetic, cursed. They decided it the day my son was born dead, and they haven't changed their minds since. So maybe we're a good match." Caleb's mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "The widow nobody wants and the rancher everyone's afraid of." Sounds like a terrible song. Sounds like the truth. Snow started falling an hour into the ride, soft and deliberate, the kind that would accumulate into something serious by nightfall. Caleb urged the horse faster, but didn't push too hard. The road was getting slick. Ivy slept through most of the journey, warm against Eliza's chest. She woke once to eat, and Eliza managed to feed her while the wagon bounced over ruts, which felt like accomplishing something impossible. When Ivy fell back asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful, Eliza felt a small spark of something that might have been pride. She could do this. Maybe she could actually do this. The ranch appeared gradually, the buildings emerging from the snowfall like ships from fog. The main house was larger than Eliza expected, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and shutters that had once been painted blue. One corner of the porch sagged badly. Several shutters hung crooked. The whole structure looked like it was slowly giving up. Beyond the house stood a barn that leaned slightly to the left. Several smaller outbuildings in various states of collapse, and fencing that was more gap than fence. A few chickens scratched in the yard, looking confused by the snow. Somewhere nearby, cattle lowed mournfully. It was exactly as bad as Caleb had implied. It was also strangely beautiful. "Welcome to Mercer Ranch," Caleb said, without inflection. "Still want to stay?" Eliza looked at the sagging porch, the crooked barn, the fences that were clearly losing their war with gravity. She thought about her attic room in Black Hollow, about Mrs. Brennan's pinched face, about the market women who'd watched her drown and felt nothing. "Show me the spare room," she said. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Dust covered every surface thick enough to write in. Dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen sink, some of them growing things that might have been alive. The floor hadn't been swept in weeks. Cobwebs hung from the corners like decorations. The whole place smelled like wood smoke, and unwashed laundry and despair. Caleb looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "I've been focused on keeping Ivy alive," he said quietly. "Everything else it's fine. It's not fine, it's disgusting. Then we'll clean it." He stared at her. "We? You think I'm going to live here and just ignore the mess? I'll lose my mind in 3 days." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, more like disbelief that someone was offering help without being asked or bribed or guilted into it. He showed her upstairs to the spare room, which was the cleanest space in the house by virtue of apparently never being used. It had a bed with a decent mattress, a dresser with all its drawers, a window that looked out toward the mountains, and a door that closed properly. The walls were bare but solid. The floor didn't creak too badly. "Lock's on the inside," Caleb pointed out. "And I'm downstairs at the other end of the house. You won't even know I'm here." Eliza set her bag on the bed. Ivy was starting to fuss again, making small pre-crying noises. "Where do you want me to feed her?" "Anywhere you're comfortable. There's a rocking chair in the kitchen that Sarah used to—" He stopped. "Just use whatever you need." He left quickly, his boots heavy on the stairs. Eliza settled into the rocking chair with Ivy and looked around the kitchen while the baby ate. Through the window she could see snow accumulating in the yard, could see the chickens huddling under the porch, could see the barn door hanging open, swinging in the wind. This place was a disaster. It needed so much work she didn't even know where to start. She was already mentally cataloging what needed to be done first. Over the next 3 days, Eliza learned the true geography of Caleb Mercer's life. The ranch covered 200 acres of mountain valley, most of it grazing land for the 30 head of cattle he was barely managing to keep alive. He had chickens that needed feeding, a vegetable garden that had died from neglect, fences that needed constant repair, and a barn roof that leaked in 4 places. He worked from before dawn until after dark, collapsing into bed too exhausted to do anything except sleep. He burned food when he tried to cook. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation because he didn't know how to work the washing board. He'd been surviving on coffee and stubbornness for so long, he'd forgotten what actual energy felt like. And through it all, he took care of Ivy with the kind of fierce devotion that was almost painful to watch. He changed her diapers with hands meant for breaking fence posts. He sang to her in a voice rough from disuse. He walked the floors with her at night when she cried, bouncing her gently and whispering promises Eliza wasn't supposed to hear. He loved that baby so completely, it was obvious to anyone with eyes. Eliza started small. She cleaned the kitchen until it stopped making her skin crawl. She washed dishes, scrubbed the floor, organized the pantry, and threw out food that had evolved past recognition. She fixed the rocking chair's wobbly leg. She patched 3 holes in the window screens. Caleb watched her work with an expression caught between gratitude and confusion, like he couldn't quite believe she was really doing this. "You don't have to," he said on the second day, finding her elbow deep in a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing pans that looked like they'd been used to smelt iron. I know. I mean it. You're here for Ivy, not to be my housekeeper. Eliza looked at him. Do you want to live like this? No, but then let me help. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Why? Because I'm tired of feeling useless. She went back to scrubbing. And because this is the first place in 4 months where I haven't felt like I was taking up space I didn't deserve. He didn't have an answer for that, just stood there for a moment, then nodded once and went back outside to whatever fence was trying to kill him today. That evening, he brought in firewood without being asked and stacked it neatly beside the stove. Small repayment, acknowledgement. The rhythm developed naturally. Eliza fed Ivy every 2 to 3 hours, day and night. Between feedings, she cleaned, organized, repaired, and slowly transformed the house from disaster zone to functional living space. Caleb worked the ranch, fixed what was broken, fed the animals, and tried to keep 200 acres from collapsing into chaos. They barely spoke. When they did, it was practical. Roofs leaking in the bedroom. Chickens need more feed. Ivy spit up on the good blanket. Transactions of information, nothing personal. But Eliza noticed things. She noticed Caleb never ate until Ivy was settled. Noticed he always checked that Eliza had food before serving himself. Noticed he worked himself past exhaustion every single day, like he was trying to outrun something that lived in stillness. She noticed the way he flinched when she moved too quickly near him, the way he kept distance between them, careful never to crowd her space or touch her unless absolutely necessary. She noticed he was trying very hard to be harmless. On the 4th day, Eliza found the photograph. She was cleaning the bedroom Caleb had offered her, which she realized used to be his and Sarah's, when she found it tucked into the back of a drawer. A wedding photograph, formal and stiff the way they all were. Caleb looked younger, his face unlined, his eyes still holding something like hope. Beside him stood a woman with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sarah. Eliza studied the photograph for a long time. Sarah had been beautiful in that delicate way that made men stupid. Small waist, perfect posture, the kind of face people wrote songs about. She looked nothing like Eliza. You shouldn't be sleeping in there. Eliza jumped, nearly dropping the photograph. Caleb stood in the doorway, covered in mud from whatever disaster he'd been dealing with outside. I was just... She held up the photograph. I found this. His expression went carefully blank. That's Sarah. I figured. She was... He stopped. She would have hated what this place became. She tried so hard to keep it nice. Eliza looked around the room, which she'd spent the morning cleaning. She could see traces of Sarah everywhere now that she was looking. The curtains someone had hemmed by hand, the carefully arranged dresser, the small touches that marked this as a woman's space. I'll move to the other room, she said. No. Caleb shook his head. That room's yours now. I can't sleep in here anyway. Haven't been able to since she... He gestured vaguely. So it's yours. Do whatever you want with it. Are you sure? Yes. He was already backing away, like the room itself was painful to be in. Just maybe put that photograph somewhere else. I don't need to see it every day. He left before she could respond. That night, Eliza sat in the rocking chair feeding Ivy while Caleb cooked dinner. He'd gotten slightly better at it over the past few days. The food was now merely mediocre instead of actively dangerous. He moved around the kitchen with economic efficiency. No wasted movement. Everything purposeful. Your wife taught you to cook? Eliza asked. Tried to. I wasn't a good student. He stirred something that might have been stew. She was patient, though. More patient than I deserved. You loved her. Wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yes. And she loved you? He was quiet for long enough that Eliza thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I think so. In the beginning, at least. He stopped. Before I became someone difficult to love. Ivy had fallen asleep, milk dribbling from her mouth. Eliza wiped it away gently. You think you're difficult to love? I know I am. Because you lost your temper once? Because I lose it regularly. He turned to face her, his expression hard. I'm not a good man, Eliza. Sarah figured that out eventually. That's why she... He stopped again, like the words were stuck. Why she stopped looking at me the way she used to. Eliza wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, But she didn't know him well enough to make that claim. Instead, she just said, "She gave you Ivy." "Yeah." His face softened slightly. "She did." They ate dinner in silence. The food was oversalted, but Eliza didn't complain. After, she washed dishes while Caleb sat with Ivy, letting the baby grab his finger and hold on with surprising strength. "She's getting bigger," he said quietly. "That's what babies do when you feed them." "I know, but—" He looked up at Eliza. "A week ago I thought she was going to die. Now she's going to be okay. Because of you." The gratitude in his voice made Eliza's chest tight. "I'm just feeding her." "You're saving her life. You'd have figured something out." "No," said flatly, with absolute certainty. "I wouldn't have. I'd tried everything. I was out of options. You were the last chance she had, and you said yes even though you knew what it would cost you." Eliza looked down at the soapy water, her hands red from the heat. "What did it cost me?" "Your reputation, your room, your place in town. I didn't have much of any of those to begin with." "Still." Caleb shifted Ivy to his other arm. "I know what people are saying. About you being here. About us. Do you care?" "Only because it affects you." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Eliza harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had cared how things affected her? When had anyone considered her feelings before their own convenience? She couldn't remember. "I should check on the chickens," Caleb said, standing carefully so Ivy didn't wake. "Can you take her?" Eliza dried her hands and lifted the baby from his arms. Their fingers touched during the transfer, and she noticed again how rough his hands were, how scarred, how much they shook when they held his daughter. He left through the kitchen door, letting in a blast of cold air. Eliza stood in the warm kitchen, holding a sleeping baby, and wondered what exactly she'd agreed to when she'd climbed into Caleb Mercer's wagon 4 days ago. Whatever it was too late to take it back now. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when Caleb's 2 hired hands showed up drunk. Eliza was in the garden behind the house, trying to resurrect what Sarah had apparently planted before she died. Most of it was beyond saving. Weeds had strangled the vegetables, frost had killed anything the weeds missed. But there were a few stubborn potato plants that might produce something edible if she could clear the space around them. Her hands were black with dirt. Her back ached from bending over. Ivy slept in a basket nearby, wrapped in blankets against the cold. She heard the horses first, then the voices. Men laughing too loud, words slurring together in ways that made her stomach tighten. Eliza stood up slowly and moved to position herself between the basket and whatever was coming. 2 men rode into the yard, ranch hands she'd seen from a distance over the past week, but never spoken to. Caleb had hired them a month ago to help with the cattle and fence repairs. They lived in the bunkhouse beyond the barn and mostly kept to themselves. She knew their names, Pete and Lyle, and nothing else about them. Both were drunk enough that staying on their horses seemed to require concentration. "Well, well," Pete said, his eyes finding Eliza and fixing there. "Look what we got here," Lyle laughed, swaying in his saddle. "Caleb's new house guest, the one everyone's talking about." Eliza's fingers curled into fists. "Caleb's not here. He rode out to check the northern fence line." "We know." Pete dismounted with the exaggerated care of someone who knew they were too drunk to make it look smooth. "We saw him leave an hour ago. That's why we came back." Everything in Eliza's body went cold. "You should leave." "Should we?" Lyle climbed down from his horse, stumbled, caught himself on the fence post. "See, here's the thing. We got fired this morning." "Fired," Pete agreed. "Thrown off the ranch, told never to come back. You know why?" Eliza took a step back toward Ivy's basket. "I don't care why." "Of course you don't, but I'll tell you anyway." Pete started walking toward her, not fast, but deliberate. "Couple days ago, we were in the barn talking, just talking, about how strange it is that Caleb's got a woman living here so soon after his wife died, about how convenient it is that she's got milk for his baby, about how desperate a woman must be to move in with a man everyone knows has a temper like a rattlesnake. We weren't saying anything everybody else isn't thinking," Lyle added, moving to flank her from the other side. "But somehow Caleb heard about it. Got in our faces this morning, told us we were done. Said if he heard us talking about you again, we'd regret it." Pete stopped about 10 feet away, his expression ugly. "So we lost our jobs because of you, because Caleb Mercer decided protecting your reputation was more important than keeping good workers." "You're drunk," Eliza said, forcing her voice steady. "Leave now? And I won't tell Caleb you came back." "You won't tell Caleb?" Pete laughed. "You think we're scared of him?" "You should be." "Why? Because he broke some doctor's kid's jaw? Because people whisper about how dangerous he is?" Pete took another step forward. "We're not scared, we're angry. And you're the reason we're out of work." Eliza's heart was slamming against her ribs, but she kept her voice level. "I had nothing to do with Caleb firing you. That was his decision. Based on you being here, based on him thinking you're worth defending." Lyle had gotten closer without her noticing, was now only a few yards away. "So I'm curious. What makes you so special?" "Nothing. I'm just feeding his daughter." "That all you're doing?" Pete's eyes traveled down her body and back up in a way that made her skin crawl. "Seems like a lot of effort for just feeding a baby. Living here, playing house, keeping his bed warm. I'm not." "Sure you're not." He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're just a good Christian woman helping a neighbor in need. Nothing improper going on at all." Eliza looked past him toward the barn, the bunkhouse, anywhere Caleb might appear from. The yard was empty. The only sound was wind moving through the broken fences and Ivy's small sleeping breaths from the basket behind her. "You need to leave," she said again. "Or what?" Lyle was behind her now. She could feel him there, even though she couldn't see him. "You gonna make us?" In the basket, Ivy started crying. The sound cut through everything, thin and desperate and completely oblivious to the danger nearby. Eliza's body responded before her brain caught up, moving toward the basket on pure instinct. Pete stepped into her path. "Not so fast." His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "We're not done talking." Eliza tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Let go." "Make me." She drove her knee up toward his groin, but he twisted at the last second and her knee hit his thigh instead. He barely flinched, just laughed and grabbed her other arm, holding her in place. "Feisty," he said. "I like that." Ivy's crying intensified. Lyle had moved to the basket, was looking down at the screaming baby with an expression somewhere between amusement and disgust. "This the one?" he asked. "The reason you're here? Doesn't look like much." "Don't touch her," Eliza said, her voice breaking. "Please don't touch her." Pete's face was inches from hers now, his breath hot and sour. "Maybe we should take the baby, give her back to Caleb ourselves, tell him his live-in whore couldn't even keep his daughter safe." Terror shot through Eliza like lightning. She stopped trying to pull away and instead drove her head forward, aiming for Pete's nose. She hit something, his chin maybe, or his cheek, and pain exploded through her skull, but Pete's grip loosened. She wrenched one arm free and shoved him hard. He stumbled back, more from surprise than force, and Eliza ran for the basket. She grabbed Ivy and held her tight, putting her body between the baby and the men, her back against the garden fence with nowhere else to go. "That was stupid," Pete said, wiping blood from his lip where her forehead had split it. "Now I'm actually angry." He started toward her again. Eliza looked around desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. A shovel leaned against the fence post. She grabbed it with one hand while clutching Ivy with the other, holding the tool like a club. "Stay back," she said. Pete just smiled. "Put the shovel down before you hurt yourself." "I'll hurt you first." "Will you?" He took another step. "I don't think so. I think you're scared and out of options, and..." The rifle shot was so loud it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Eliza screamed, Ivy screamed, Pete dove sideways, and Lyle hit the ground like someone had cut his strings. When the echo faded, there was Caleb. He sat on his horse at the edge of the yard, rifle still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. The shot had hit the wagon wheel near Pete's head, close enough that splinters of wood were embedded in the fence post behind where he'd been standing. Caleb's face was absolutely empty. "Get up," he said quietly. Pete and Lyle scrambled to their feet, both suddenly looking much more sober than they had 30 seconds ago. "Caleb, we were just..." Pete started. "I told you this morning to get off my land." Caleb's voice was flat and cold and more terrifying than if he'd been yelling. "You came back anyway. You came back and you put your hands on her." "We didn't hurt her. I saw what you did." Caleb dismounted slowly, rifle still pointed in their general direction. "I was on the ridge. Saw you ride in. Saw you corner her. Saw you grab her." He walked toward them with the careful, deliberate steps of a man who was physically restraining himself from running. When he got close enough, Eliza could see his hands shaking, could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, could see something in his eyes that looked like murder barely contained. "You touched her," he said again, like he was trying to make himself believe it. "You put your hands on her while she was trying to protect my daughter." "Caleb, man, we were just talking." "You grabbed her arm." Caleb's voice had started to rise. "I saw the bruises forming from 100 yards away. You want to tell me that was talking?" Pete held up both hands. "Look, we'd been drinking, we weren't thinking straight. You were thinking straight enough to wait until I left. Thinking straight enough to corner her when she was alone. Thinking straight enough to scare a woman half to death while a baby screamed." The rifle barrel dipped slightly, pointing more directly at Pete's chest. Eliza's breath stopped. She'd seen Caleb angry before, seen him throw tools when something broke, seen him curse at cattle that wouldn't cooperate, seen frustration written across his face in a dozen different ways. This wasn't anger, this was something else entirely. "Caleb," she said quietly, "don't." He didn't look at her. "Take Ivy inside." "Caleb, now." She wanted to argue, wanted to stay and make sure he didn't do something he couldn't take back, but Ivy was still screaming and her own hands were shaking too badly to trust. She hurried toward the house, looking back over her shoulder to see Caleb standing perfectly still while Pete and Lyle backed slowly toward their horses. "You're making a mistake," Pete said, his voice shaking now. "We'll tell everyone about this. Tell them you threatened us with a rifle over nothing." "Over nothing?" Caleb repeated. "You think terrorizing women is nothing? We didn't—" "Get on your horses," Caleb cut him off. "Ride back to Black Hollow. Tell everyone whatever story makes you feel like men instead of cowards. But if I see either of you on my land again, if I hear you've been anywhere near Eliza in town, if you so much as look at her wrong—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. Pete and Lyle mounted their horses fast, hands fumbling with reins. As they turned to leave, Pete couldn't resist one last shot. "Everyone already knows what she is," he called back. "Living here with you? Playing wife when the real one's barely cold in the ground. You think defending her makes it better? You think—" The second rifle shot took off Pete's hat without touching his head. Both men kicked their horses into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Caleb stood there for a long time after they were gone, rifle lowered now but still gripped tight enough that his knuckles had gone white. His breathing was too fast. His whole body was rigid. Eliza watched from the kitchen window, unsure whether to go to him or leave him alone. Ivy had stopped crying, was now just making small hiccuping sounds against Eliza's shoulder. Finally, Caleb moved. He propped the rifle against the fence post and walked toward the house with his head down, his hands shaking so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. When he came through the kitchen door, he looked at Eliza and his expression cracked. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rough. "No, scared, but not hurt." "Your arm." He grabbed your arm. Eliza looked down. There were red marks on her bicep where Pete's fingers had dug in, already darkening toward purple. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides, reached out like he was going to touch her arm, then caught himself and pulled back. "I should have killed them." "No, you shouldn't have." "They put their hands on you. They threatened Ivy. I should have—" "You did enough." Eliza shifted Ivy to her other shoulder. "You stopped them. You sent them away. That's enough." "Is it?" He looked at her with eyes that were still too wild, too angry, too close to doing something irreversible. "Because all I can think about is what would have happened if I'd been 10 minutes later, if I hadn't decided to check the southern pasture instead of the northern one, if I hadn't seen them ride in." Eliza didn't want to think about that either. "But you did see them, and nothing happened." "Something did happen. They scared you. They made you afraid in your own—" He stopped himself. "They made you afraid. I'm okay now." "You're shaking." She was. Her whole body was trembling, adrenaline still flooding her system even though the danger had passed. Ivy was picking up on it too, fussing against her shoulder. "Give her to me," Caleb said quietly. Eliza handed over the baby and watched Caleb's transformation as Ivy settled into his arms. The wildness in his eyes dimmed. His breathing slowed. His hands stopped shaking, or at least shook less. "Hey there," he murmured to Ivy. "It's okay. Everything's okay." The baby made a small cooing sound. "She believes you," Eliza said. "She's easy to convince." He looked up. "You should sit down. You're pale." "I'm fine." "Eliza, sit." She sat, mostly because her legs were threatening to give out anyway. The chair felt solid beneath her, real. She focused on breathing slowly, on making her hands uncurl from the fists they'd formed. Caleb pulled out the other chair and sat across from her, still holding Ivy. For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the chickens had resumed their scratching in the yard, oblivious to what had just happened. The wind rattled the windows. Normal sounds, the world continuing like nothing had changed. But everything felt different now. "This is my fault," Caleb said finally. "How is any of that your fault? I hired them. I brought them here. I should have known they'd—" He stopped. "I should have protected you better. You fired them for talking about me. That's more protection than I've ever gotten from anyone. It wasn't enough. It was more than enough." Eliza leaned forward. "Caleb, I chose to come here. I knew what people would say. I knew the risk. You don't owe me—" "Yes, I do." His voice was fierce. "You saved Ivy's life. You gave up your room, your reputation, everything to help us. The least I can do is make sure you're safe. You did make sure. You came back. You stopped them. This time." His jaw was tight again. "What about next time?" "There won't be a next time." "You don't know that." He looked down at Ivy, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "Pete and Lyle will go back to town. They'll tell everyone I threatened them over nothing. They'll make you sound like—" He stopped. "They'll make it worse." Eliza knew he was right. She could already imagine the stories spreading through Black Hollow like wildfire. The desperate widow seducing a grieving widower. The shameless woman who'd driven good men from their jobs. The countless variations on a theme of her unworthiness. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "I don't care anymore." "You should care. Your name—" "My name was already mud in that town. This doesn't change anything." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "Yes." And the strange thing was, she did. Somewhere between leaving the boarding house and defending Ivy with a shovel, she'd stopped caring what Black Hollow thought of her. "They decided who I was 4 months ago. Nothing I do will change their minds." "Then stay," Caleb said. "What?" "Stay here, permanently. Not just until Ivy's weaned. Stay and help me run this place. I'll pay you fair wages, give you a real room, you'll have work and purpose, and—" He stopped. "And you won't have to go back to that town full of people who can't see what you're worth." The offer hung in the air between them. Eliza's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself, to not risk getting attached to something that could be taken away. But she looked around the kitchen she'd cleaned, thought about the garden she was trying to resurrect, remembered the weight of Ivy in her arms. This was the first place in months where she'd felt useful, the first place where someone had defended her without shame, the first place that felt like it might become home if she let it. "I'll think about it," she said. Caleb nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. "That's all I'm asking." That night, Eliza lay in bed listening to the house settle around her and tried to imagine staying permanently. Tried to picture herself here in 6 months, a year, 5 years, working the ranch, raising chickens, baking bread in a kitchen that was actually hers. Watching Ivy grow up. The images came easier than they should have. She fell asleep still thinking about it and woke 3 hours later to Ivy screaming. She stumbled downstairs to find Caleb already in the kitchen, walking the floor with his daughter while trying to heat milk on the stove. "She won't settle," he said, looking exhausted. "I don't know what's wrong." Eliza took the baby and felt her forehead. "She's warm." "How warm?" "Warmer than usual." Eliza unbuttoned her nightdress and tried to get Ivy to nurse, but the baby turned her head away, crying harder. "She doesn't want to eat." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Maybe her stomach hurts? Maybe she's getting sick?" Caleb's face had gone pale. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "Which doctor? The one who wouldn't help your wife?" He flinched. "Then what do I do?" "Get Agnes. She'll know what to do." Caleb was out the door before Eliza finished the sentence, not even stopping for a coat. She heard his horse galloping away into the night, and then she was alone with a screaming baby who wouldn't eat and wouldn't be comforted and felt hot enough to scare her. "Come on, sweet girl," Eliza whispered, walking the same path Caleb had worn in the floorboards. "Tell me what's wrong. Tell me how to help you." Ivy just cried harder. By the time Caleb returned with Agnes an hour later, Eliza was near tears herself. Her arms ached from holding the baby. Her voice was hoarse from singing every lullaby she could remember. Nothing had worked. Agnes took one look at Ivy and started issuing orders. "Get me cool water and clean cloths. Eliza, unswaddle her. Caleb, build up the fire but don't make it too hot. Move. They moved. Agnes examined Ivy with quick, efficient hands, checking her temperature, her breathing, the color of her skin. She listened to her chest, looked in her mouth, pressed gently on her stomach. It's colic, she said finally. Colic? Caleb repeated. That's all? That's enough. Her stomach's cramping. She's miserable. But she's not dying. The relief on his face was almost painful to watch. What do we do? Wait it out. Keep her comfortable. Try to get her to eat small amounts. It'll pass. How long? Could be hours, could be days. Every baby's different. Agnes looked at Eliza. You've been feeding her how often? Every 2 to 3 hours. Try smaller amounts more frequently. Her stomach's not handling large feedings well. Agnes started packing up her bag. I'll come back tomorrow to check on her. You're leaving? Caleb looked panicked. She's going to cry for hours, Caleb. Me being here won't change that. You and Eliza can handle this. But you can handle this? Agnes repeated firmly. She looked at Eliza. Keep him from doing anything stupid. He tends toward panic where Ivy's concerned. I do not, Caleb started. You rode to my house at midnight because your baby had a stomachache. Agnes raised an eyebrow. That's panic. She left before he could argue. Caleb looked at Eliza helplessly. Now what? Now we do what Agnes said, small amounts, frequently, and we wait. They waited. Ivy cried for 3 hours straight, only stopping when she exhausted herself into brief periods of sleep before waking up screaming again. Eliza and Caleb took turns walking with her, trying to feed her, changing her diaper, doing anything they could think of to ease her discomfort. Nothing worked for long. Around 4 in the morning, Eliza found Caleb sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, Ivy wailing in his arms, tears running down his face. I don't know what to do, he said. I don't know how to help her. Eliza slid down to sit beside him, their shoulders touching. You're doing everything right. She's in pain. I know. And I can't fix it. Some things can't be fixed, just endured. Eliza reached over and wiped the milk from Ivy's chin. Okay, Agnes said so. Agnes isn't always right. She is about this. Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder without thinking about it, too exhausted to maintain proper distance. We just have to get through tonight. Caleb didn't pull away. Just sat there with his daughter screaming and Eliza's weight against him and the whole world reduced to this kitchen, this moment, this shared exhaustion. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For staying. For not running away the second things got hard. Where would I run to? The boarding house, town, anywhere that's not here dealing with my dying ranch and my sick baby and my complete inability to handle any of it. Eliza lifted her head to look at him. Your ranch isn't dying, your baby isn't sick, and you're handling it fine. I'm sitting on the floor crying. So? You're allowed to cry. Your daughter's in pain and you can't fix it. That's worth crying about. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. You're not crying. I cried earlier while you were getting Agnes, used up all my tears before you got back. That surprised a laugh out of him, short and broken, but real. We're a mess. Complete disaster. Ivy's crying had tapered off to exhausted whimpering. She was still clearly uncomfortable, her small face scrunched with displeasure, but the worst of it seemed to have passed. She's quieting down, Caleb said. For now. She'll probably start again in 20 minutes. You're very encouraging. I'm very realistic. Eliza stood up, her knees protesting. Come on, let's try feeding her again. Small amount, like Agnes said. They managed to get Ivy to take half an ounce before she started fussing again. It wasn't much, but it was something. They settled her in the basket, both of them hovering nearby in case she started screaming again. She didn't. Just lay there making small, unhappy sounds while her parents, except Eliza wasn't her parent, she had to remember that, watched with matching expressions of helpless concern. You should sleep, Caleb said. I'll watch her. You should sleep. You have to work tomorrow. So do you. My work can wait. Yours can't. They stared at each other, both too stubborn to give in, both too exhausted to argue properly. We could both sleep, Eliza suggested. Bring her basket upstairs, put it between our rooms. We'll hear her if she needs us. You want me to sleep upstairs? You want to sleep on the kitchen floor? He considered. Fair point. They carried Ivy upstairs together, placing her basket in the hallway where both their doors were in sight. Eliza's room was on one side, Caleb's on the other, the room that used to be the spare but had become his after Sarah died. "Wake me if you need help," Caleb said. "Same." They retreated to their respective rooms. Eliza left her door cracked open so she could hear Ivy, climbed into bed fully clothed, and was asleep in seconds. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and panic flooding her chest. How long had she slept? Was Ivy okay? Why hadn't she heard? She stumbled into the hallway to find the basket empty. Her heart stopped. Then she heard voices downstairs. Male voices. Multiple ones. She rushed down the stairs to find Caleb in the kitchen with 3 men she didn't recognize. They all turned to look at her, and she realized she was in her nightdress, her hair loose, clearly just woken up. In front of strangers. Heat flooded her face. "Sorry," one of the men said quickly. "We didn't know you had company." "She's not company," Caleb said. "She lives here. Eliza, these are ranch hands from the Double J. They're here about buying some of my cattle." The men's eyes traveled from Eliza to Caleb and back, making calculations she could see happening in real time. A woman in her nightclothes, a man alone, both clearly just woken up. "We can come back later," the tallest one offered. "No need," Caleb said flatly. "Let's talk in the barn." He left with them, Ivy in his arms, without looking at Eliza again. She stood in the kitchen feeling exposed and stupid and angry at herself for caring what 3 strangers thought. She got dressed, braided her hair, tried to make herself look like someone respectable instead of someone caught in a compromising situation. It didn't help. When Caleb returned an hour later, he found her scrubbing the kitchen floor with more force than necessary. "They bought 6 head," he said. "Good price, too." "Wonderful." "Eliza, I embarrassed you." She kept scrubbing. "Coming downstairs like that? I should have checked first. You didn't embarrass me." "Those men thought, I don't care what they thought." He crouched down so they were eye level. "You live here. You're allowed to come downstairs in your nightdress in your own house. It's not my house." "It could be." She stopped scrubbing. "What?" "Stay," he said again. "Permanently. Help me run this place. We'll tell people you're my partner in the ranch. Not a servant, not a temporary arrangement. A real partnership." "Caleb, I know it's not a perfect solution. People will still talk, but at least you'll have standing, position. Something beyond the woman Caleb took in." Eliza sat back on her heels, studying his face. He looked serious, determined, like he'd been thinking about this for a while. "Why?" she asked. "Because this place runs better with you here. Because Ivy needs you. Because—" He stopped. "Because I don't want you to leave." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Before she could try again, Ivy started crying from the other room. "I'll get her," Caleb said, standing. He left Eliza kneeling on the kitchen floor with a scrub brush in her hand, and an offer she didn't know how to answer sitting in her chest like a stone. Eliza didn't give Caleb an answer about staying permanently. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. She just kept working, cleaning, cooking, caring for Ivy, fixing things that broke, like the question hadn't been asked at all. Caleb didn't push. He just watched her with an expression she couldn't read and waited. The ranch slowly transformed under their combined effort. Fences got repaired, the barn roof got patched, the garden started producing actual vegetables instead of just weeds. Caleb hired 2 new ranch hands from a town 30 miles away, men who didn't know the gossip and didn't care about Eliza's presence beyond the fact that she cooked better meals than they'd had in months. Life developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, feed Ivy, make breakfast, work until exhaustion. Feed Ivy again, collapse into bed, repeat. It should have been miserable. Instead, Eliza found herself almost content. 3 weeks after Pete and Lyle's attack, Caleb came in from the northern pasture with blood on his shirt and fury in his eyes. "What happened?" Eliza demanded, setting down the bread dough she'd been kneading. "Nothing. That's not nothing." She pointed at his shirt. "You're bleeding." "It's not my blood." He stripped off the shirt without ceremony, revealing a chest covered in old scars and new bruises. "Got into it with a mountain lion that thought my cattle looked easy." "Did you kill it?" "Scared it off. Might come back, though." He walked to the basin and started washing blood off his hands. "Need to set up watch tonight. Make sure it doesn't return." Eliza looked at his back and noticed more scars there. Long ones, short ones. Some that looked like they'd been stitched badly, and others that had just been left to heal however they wanted. The map of a hard life written in damaged skin. How'd you get that one? She pointed to a particularly nasty scar along his left shoulder blade. Horse threw me into a fence post when I was 16. And that one? Bar fight in Denver. Guy had a knife. You win? I'm alive and he's not, so I'd say yes. Caleb dried his hands and reached for a clean shirt. You don't have to look so worried. I've survived worse. That's not comforting. Wasn't meant to be comforting, just true. He pulled the shirt on, wincing slightly. We need supplies from town. I was thinking about going tomorrow. Eliza's stomach tightened. I'll stay here with Ivy. You could come with us. No. Eliza, I said no. She went back to kneading dough with more force than necessary. I'm not ready to face that town yet. You'll have to eventually. Maybe, but not tomorrow. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll go alone. He left at dawn the next morning with a list of supplies Eliza had written out and money from the cattle sale. Eliza watched him ride away and felt an unexpected flutter of anxiety in her chest. He'd be gone for hours. She'd be alone at the ranch with just Ivy and the two new hands who stayed in the bunkhouse and barely spoke to her. She told herself it was fine. It was fine. Ivy had other ideas. The baby spent the entire morning fussy and refusing to eat properly, spitting up more than she kept down, crying for no reason Eliza could identify. By noon, Eliza was frazzled and exhausted and starting to panic that something was seriously wrong. That's when the carriage arrived. Eliza heard it coming up the road, and her first thought was that Caleb had returned early, but the sound was wrong, too light, too refined. She looked out the window and felt her blood go cold. 3 women climbed out of an expensive carriage, their dresses impeccable, their faces set with determination. Eliza recognized 2 of them from the market, Martha Drummond and Susan Parrish. The third was older, severe-looking, probably someone important in town. They knocked on the door like they owned it. Eliza considered not answering, considered hiding upstairs and pretending no one was home, but they'd seen smoke from the chimney. They knew someone was here. She opened the door with Ivy fussing against her shoulder. Miss Boone, Martha said, her smile not reaching her eyes. May we come in? Why? We're here out of concern. The older woman spoke now, her voice clipped and authoritative. I'm Mrs. Thornton. I chair the Ladies' Improvement Society. We've heard troubling things about your situation here. What situation? A young, unmarried woman living alone with a widower. Mrs. Thornton's eyes swept over Eliza with obvious disapproval. Surely you understand how inappropriate this appears. I'm caring for his daughter. Yes, we've heard that excuse. Susan Parrish stepped forward. But the baby is nearly 2 months old now. Surely Mr. Mercer could hire a proper wet nurse from another town. Your continued presence here suggests something else entirely. Eliza's fingers tightened on Ivy. You need to leave. We need to discuss your welfare, Martha said, and the welfare of that poor child. Ivy's fine. Is she? Mrs. Thornton moved closer, peering at the baby. She looks thin, and you look exhausted. This arrangement clearly isn't working. We're managing. Are you? The older woman's expression hardened. Miss Boone, I'll be direct. Your presence here is causing scandal. Mr. Mercer's reputation was already damaged after his wife's unfortunate death. Now he's brought you here, a woman of questionable circumstances, and installed you in his home like a... She paused delicately. Like a wife. I'm not his wife. Then what are you, or are you? The question hung in the air. Eliza didn't have a good answer. She wasn't the housekeeper. Caleb didn't pay her wages. She wasn't family. She wasn't a hired wet nurse with a formal contract. She was just here, existing in a space that didn't have a name. Mrs. Thornton took her silence as confirmation. You see the problem. You have no defined role, no protection, no guarantee of anything. Mr. Mercer could send you away tomorrow and you'd have nothing. He wouldn't do that. How do you know? Susan asked, her voice dripping with false concern. Men say many things when they need something from a woman. Once that need is fulfilled, Caleb's not like that. Isn't he? Martha leaned in. He has a history of violence, Eliza. Everyone knows about the fight that led to his wife's death. Everyone knows he threatened Pete and Lyle with a rifle. What happens when he turns that temper on you? He won't. You can't know that. Mrs. Thornton pulled a folded paper from her bag. We've made arrangements. There's a position available at a respectable boarding house in Denver. Room and board provided in exchange for light housekeeping. You'd be safe, protected, away from this compromising situation. Eliza stared at the paper. You want me to leave? We want you to have a proper life, Martha said. One that doesn't depend on the whims of a violent man with a baby he can't care for properly. I'm caring for her. And doing a poor job of it from what we can see. Mrs. Thornton gestured at Ivy, who was still fussing. The child is clearly distressed. She needs a proper mother, not a temporary wet nurse playing house. Something inside Eliza snapped. Get out, she said quietly. Excuse me? Get out of this house, now. Martha's expression shifted to shock. We're trying to help you. You're trying to run me out of town. Again. Just like you did at the boarding house, just like you did at the market. Just like you've done every day since my son died. Eliza's voice was shaking, but she kept going. You don't care about my welfare. You care about maintaining your version of respectability. You care about having someone to look down on so you can feel better about your own miserable lives. Mrs. Thornton's face went rigid. How dare you? How dare you show up at someone else's home and tell them how to live? This isn't your house. Ivy isn't your concern. My choices aren't your business. Eliza stepped forward, using her size for the first time in her life as something powerful instead of shameful. So take your fake concern and your Denver boarding house and leave. Before I forget how to be polite. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Thornton drew herself up to her full height, which was still several inches shorter than Eliza. You're making a terrible mistake, Miss Boone. When Mr. Mercer abandons you, don't expect any sympathy from Black Hollow. I've never expected sympathy from Black Hollow. Why would I start now? The three women left in a rustle of expensive fabric and wounded pride. Eliza watched their carriage disappear down the road and felt her knees go weak. She'd just told off the most powerful women in town, had burned bridges she might have needed someday. She couldn't bring herself to regret it. Ivy had finally stopped fussing, was now looking up at Eliza with wide, dark eyes, almost like she approved. Your father better appreciate this, Eliza murmured to the baby, because I just destroyed any chance of ever going back to that town. Caleb returned 3 hours later to find Eliza in the kitchen, hands shaking as she tried to peel potatoes. He took one look at her face and set down the supply bags. What happened? She told him. All of it. The women, their offer, the things they'd said about him and about Ivy, the way she'd thrown them out. By the time she finished, Caleb's expression had gone dark. They came here while I was gone, he said slowly. They cornered you in our home and tried to convince you to leave. Yes? And they insulted Ivy. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, good thing you threw them out. If I'd been here, I might have done something I'd regret. Like what? Like told Mrs. Thornton exactly what I think of her and her improvement society. Like reminded Martha Drummond that her husband visits the saloon girls twice a week. Like, he stopped himself. It doesn't matter. You handled it. I destroyed my reputation. You protected your home. He said it with such certainty that Eliza blinked. This is your home now. You had every right to defend it. Caleb, I'm serious. Stay. Permanently. Be my partner in this ranch. Help me build something that lasts. He moved closer. I can't do this alone. I tried. It nearly destroyed me. But with you here, everything works. The house runs. Ivy thrives. The ranch is actually profitable for the first time in years. We're good together. As business partners. Yes, as business partners. He paused. Unless you want something else. The air between them shifted. Eliza's heart was suddenly beating too fast. What else could I want? She asked carefully. Caleb looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Something raw and uncertain and almost hopeful. I don't know. You tell me. Before she could answer, Ivy started crying from the other room. The moment broke. Caleb went to get his daughter while Eliza stood in the kitchen trying to catch her breath and figure out what had just almost happened. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Caleb's offer. Partnership. Home. A future that didn't involve returning to Black Hollow with her tail between her legs. It was more than she'd ever expected to have. It was also terrifying, because somewhere over the past few weeks, she'd stopped thinking about Caleb as just the man who needed help with his daughter. She'd started noticing the way he was gentle with Ivy despite his rough hands, the way he always made sure Eliza ate before serving himself, The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching. She'd started feeling things she had no business feeling, and that was dangerous. The next morning, Caleb announced he was going to town. Again? Eliza asked, surprised. Need to file some paperwork at the county office. Shouldn't take long. He paused. You could come with me. I told you. I know. But Eliza, you can't hide here forever. Eventually, you'll need to face them. Why? Because I'm not letting them run you off. If you stay at this ranch permanently, you'll need to be able to go into town for supplies, for business, for living. He looked at her steadily. Let them see you're not ashamed. Let them see you chose this. He was right. She hated that he was right. Fine, she said, but I'm not staying long. They rode into Black Hollow together with Ivy bundled between them in the wagon. It was market day again. The same square where this had all started 6 weeks ago was now full of people who would definitely have opinions about Eliza Boone returning with Caleb Mercer. Heads turned as they drove through. Conversation stopped. Women clutched their baskets tighter, like Eliza's presence might contaminate them through proximity. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the county office and climbed down. He came around to help Eliza, offering his hand publicly, making it clear she was with him. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. I'll be quick, he said. Wait here with Ivy. He disappeared into the building. Eliza stood beside the wagon holding the baby and feeling every eye in the square boring into her. She kept her chin up and her expression neutral and tried to pretend she didn't care. Then she heard the whispers. Shameless. Living in sin. Poor Sarah, barely cold in her grave. Eliza's fingers tightened on Ivy. The baby cooed, oblivious to the judgment surrounding them. Someone cleared their throat behind her. Eliza turned to find Agnes standing there, leaning on her cane, her expression thoughtful. You look good, Agnes said. Better than when you were starving yourself in that attic. I'm eating regularly now. Shows. Agnes moved closer, peering at Ivy. Baby's thriving too. Good color. Alert. You've done well with her. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just stating facts. Agnes lowered her voice. I heard about Mrs. Thornton's visit. Heard you sent her packing. News travels fast. In this town, always has. Agnes smiled slightly. Good for you. That woman needed someone to tell her no. I might have been too harsh. You were exactly harsh enough. Agnes squeezed Eliza's arm. Don't let them make you small again. You found something good out at that ranch. Something real. Don't apologize for it. Before Eliza could respond, Martha Drummond's voice cut across the square. Agnes Hartwell, surely you're not condoning this situation. Agnes turned slowly. I'm condoning a woman feeding a starving baby. You got a problem with that? I have a problem with impropriety masquerading as charity. Martha moved closer, her daughter Caroline trailing behind. Miss Boone is living in sin with a man who... Who what? Agnes's voice went sharp. Who lost his wife and nearly lost his daughter? Who asked for help and got it from the only person brave enough to say yes? That man? Brave or desperate? Susan Parrish had joined them now. We all know why Eliza agreed to this arrangement. No other man would have her, so she settled for... Careful. The voice came from behind Eliza. She turned to find Caleb standing there, the paperwork completed, his expression dangerous. Real careful what you say about her. Susan paled but held her ground. We're simply concerned about propriety, Mr. Mercer. Propriety. Caleb repeated the word like it tasted bad. You want to talk about propriety? How about the propriety of letting a baby die because you were too self-righteous to help? How about the propriety of mocking a grieving woman every day for months? How about the propriety of showing up at my ranch uninvited to harass someone in their own home? Martha's face flushed. We were trying to help. You were trying to shame her into leaving. Difference is, Eliza doesn't shame easy anymore. Caleb moved to stand beside Eliza, close enough that their shoulders touched. She's staying at Mercer Ranch, permanently, as my partner. And if any of you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me. The square had gone silent. Everyone was watching now, conversations abandoned in favor of witnessing this confrontation. Mrs. Thornton pushed through the crowd, her face set with disapproval. Mr. Mercer, this is highly irregular. Miss Boone has no legal standing at your ranch, no protection, no guarantee of... Then I'll marry her. The words dropped like stones into still water. Eliza's breath stopped. The entire square seemed to stop with it. Caleb looked at her, his expression serious. Marry me. Make it legal. Make it impossible for anyone to question your place at the ranch or your role in Ivy's life. Caleb, Eliza whispered, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. He took Ivy from her arms and held his daughter with one arm while reaching for Eliza's hand with the other. These people are never going to accept us living together unless we give them something they can understand. So let's give it to them. Marry me. That's not a reason to get married. It's not the only reason. His eyes held hers. You make the ranch work. You make Ivy happy. You make me. He stopped. You make everything better. So marry me. Please. Eliza looked at him holding their daughter. Looked at the crowd watching with bated breath. Looked at Martha and Susan and Mrs. Thornton, waiting for her to say no so they could swoop in with sympathy and judgment. She thought about the ranch that had started to feel like home. About mornings feeding Ivy while Caleb made coffee. About working side by side to fix fences and plant gardens. About the way he'd defended her without hesitation, without shame, without caring what it cost him. She thought about the alternative, returning to some anonymous boarding house, alone, useful to no one. Yes, she heard herself say, I'll marry you. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in scandalized delight. This would be talked about for months, years. The widow nobody wanted and the dangerous rancher making their arrangement respectable through the thinnest veneer of marriage. Caleb smiled, actually smiled, something Eliza had seen maybe 3 times total. Right now? What? Courthouse is right there. Judge Hendricks owes me a favor. We could do it right now, today. Before they... He gestured at the crowd. Before anyone can interfere. It was insane, impulsive, exactly the kind of decision people would use as proof that they were reckless and irresponsible. Let's do it, Eliza said. They walked to the courthouse with half of Black Hollow, following like they were witnessing an execution. Judge Hendricks was surprised but willing. He'd known Caleb for years and seemed to find the whole situation amusing rather than scandalous. You got a ring? He asked. Caleb looked stricken. He'd proposed in the town square without thinking about practical details like rings. Here. Agnes appeared beside them and pulled a simple gold band from her finger. Belonged to my mother. Consider it a loan until you can get your own. Agnes, I can't. You can, and you will. Now stop arguing and get married before these vultures convince themselves they can stop you. The ceremony took 5 minutes. Judge Hendricks read the words from a book that had probably married 100 couples in this same courthouse. Caleb's voice was steady when he repeated his vows. Eliza shook, but she got through them. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her. It was brief, formal, the kind of kiss you'd give to seal a business arrangement, but his hand was gentle on her cheek and his eyes were warm when he pulled back. Mrs. Mercer, he said quietly. The name hit her like cold water. She was someone's wife again. Had a place in the world that came with legal protections and social standing. Was no longer alone. She'd married a man she barely knew to protect a life she'd built over 6 weeks. It was completely insane. It was also the best decision she'd ever made. They signed the papers while Ivy slept in Agnes's arms. The old healer served as witness, along with Judge Hendricks' clerk, a young man who looked like he couldn't believe what he was watching. When it was done, Caleb took Eliza's arm and walked her out of the courthouse into the waiting crowd. My wife, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, and you all know how I handle disrespect. It was a threat delivered with a smile. The crowd shifted uneasily. Martha Drummond looked like she'd bitten into something rotten. Mrs. Thornton's face was rigid with disapproval. Susan Parrish was already whispering to the woman next to her, probably crafting the story of how this proved everything they'd suspected. Eliza didn't care. She was Eliza Mercer now. She had a home, a husband, a baby who needed her, a ranch that was finally starting to thrive. She had everything she'd thought was impossible 6 weeks ago. They drove home in silence, both processing what they'd just done. Ivy woke up halfway back and started fussing. Eliza fed her while Caleb drove, the motion of the wagon making it awkward but manageable. We should probably talk about this, Caleb said finally. About what? About what this marriage means. About expectations. About... He stopped. About sleeping arrangements. Eliza's stomach flipped. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Oh, you keep your room, the one with the lock. Nothing changes unless you want it to change. We're married. On paper, to protect you. But I'm not, he struggled for words. I'm not expecting anything beyond what we already have. Partnership, friendship, whatever this is. What is this? Caleb was quiet for a long time. I don't know, but it's working. So let's not mess it up by forcing it into something it's not ready to be. It was the smartest thing either of them had said all day. That night, Eliza lay in her room, still her room with her lock, her privacy intact, and tried to process the fact that she was married. Again, to a man she'd known for 6 weeks, a man who'd proposed to protect her from gossip rather than out of love. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it just felt like the next logical step in a journey that had started with a dying baby and a desperate question. Downstairs, she could hear Caleb moving around, settling Ivy for the night, banking the fire. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of home. Eliza closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that this might actually work. The marriage changed nothing and everything at the same time. Eliza still woke before dawn to feed Ivy, still worked the garden until her back ached, still cooked meals and mended clothes and fixed whatever broke that day. Caleb still rode out to check fences and cattle, still came home exhausted and covered in dirt, still sat across from her at dinner making awkward conversation about weather and livestock and things that needed repairing. But now when people came to the ranch, they called her Mrs. Mercer. Now when Caleb introduced her, he said, "My wife," with something that might have been pride in his voice. Now there was a paper filed at the county courthouse that said she belonged somewhere. It should have felt like enough. Most days it almost was. The first real test came 3 weeks after the wedding when Ivy got sick. Not colic this time, actual sick. Fever that spiked so high Eliza could feel the heat radiating off the baby's skin. Coughing that sounded like something tearing. Small body going limp in ways that made Eliza's chest tight with panic. "Get Agnes," she told Caleb at 2 in the morning, her voice shaking. Right now. He was on his horse in under a minute, riding into darkness without a coat because every second mattered. Eliza paced the kitchen with Ivy burning up in her arms, trying every remedy she could think of. Cool cloths, lukewarm baths, gentle rocking. Nothing worked. The fever kept climbing. By the time Caleb returned with Agnes 45 minutes later, Eliza was crying. "She's getting worse," Eliza said. "I don't know what to do. I've tried everything and she's just..." Agnes took the baby without ceremony and started examining her with quick, efficient movements. She listened to Ivy's chest, looked in her mouth, checked her temperature. "Pneumonia," she said finally. "Early stages, but it's there." The word hit Eliza like a fist. "Can you fix it?" "I can try." Agnes started pulling supplies from her bag. "But I need you to listen carefully. This isn't going to be easy. Next few days are critical. She needs constant care. Cool baths to keep the fever down. Medicine every 4 hours. Someone watching her every minute." "I can do that," Eliza said immediately. "You'll need to sleep eventually." "Then I'll sleep when she sleeps." Eliza took Ivy back, holding her carefully. "Just tell me what to do." Agnes showed her how to prepare the medicine, how to get a sick baby to swallow it, how to monitor breathing, how to recognize when things were getting worse versus just looking bad. She stayed for 2 hours, making sure Eliza understood everything, before finally heading home with promises to return in the morning. Caleb stood in the corner the whole time, looking helpless. "What can I do?" he asked after Agnes left. "Keep the ranch running. I'll handle Ivy." "Eliza, you can't do this alone." "I'm not alone. You're here." She looked at him. "But she needs one of us focused entirely on her, and you're better with the ranch than I am." It was true, but it clearly hurt him to accept. He wanted to be the one caring for his daughter, wanted to be useful in this crisis, but they both knew Eliza was better equipped for sick baby duty than he was. "Tell me if you need anything," he said quietly. "Anything at all." She nodded. The next 3 days were the longest of Eliza's life. She barely slept, catching 15-minute naps when Ivy dozed off between medicine doses. She stopped eating regular meals, just grabbed whatever was nearby when her stomach reminded her food existed. She wore the same dress for 48 hours straight because changing clothes meant putting Ivy down and she couldn't risk it. Caleb brought her food, sat with Ivy when Eliza absolutely had to use the privy, handled everything else so Eliza could focus entirely on keeping their daughter alive. Their daughter. When had Eliza started thinking of Ivy that way? When had this baby stopped being Caleb's responsibility and become hers too? She didn't know. Didn't have time to analyze it. Just kept giving medicine and cool baths and checking breathing and praying to nobody in particular that this small person would survive. On the third night, Ivy's fever finally broke. Eliza felt it happen, the baby's skin going from furnace hot to just warm, her breathing easing, her small body relaxing into actual sleep instead of fever-induced unconsciousness. The relief was so intense Eliza started shaking. She sat in the rocking chair holding Ivy and cried silently, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and leftover fear. Caleb found her like that an hour later. "Eliza?" He crossed the kitchen quickly. "What's wrong? Is she—" "She's okay." Eliza's voice came out hoarse from disuse. "Fever broke. She's going to be okay." The expression on Caleb's face was something Eliza would remember for the rest of her life. Relief and gratitude and something else she couldn't name. He knelt beside the rocking chair and looked at his sleeping daughter with eyes that were wet. "You saved her," he said quietly. "Again." "Agnes saved her. I just followed instructions." "You didn't sleep for 3 days. You barely ate. You stayed with her every single minute, even though you were exhausted." He looked up at Eliza. "You saved her because you wouldn't let her die. That's not following instructions. That's love." The word hung between them. Eliza looked down at Ivy's peaceful sleeping face and realized Caleb was right. Somewhere along the way, she'd fallen completely in love with this baby. Not because she was supposed to, not because it was her job, but because Ivy had needed her and Eliza had answered, and that had created something neither of them had planned for. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess it is." Caleb reached out and touched Eliza's hand where it rested on Ivy's back. Just a brief touch, his rough fingers against her knuckles, but it sent warmth through her entire body. "Thank you," he said. "You already thanked me. I'll keep thanking you every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes." He stood up, his hand sliding away from hers. "Now you need to sleep. Actually sleep. I'll watch her." "Caleb, Eliza, you're asleep on your feet. Go upstairs. I've got her." She was too exhausted to argue. She handed Ivy over and stumbled upstairs to her room, barely getting her shoes off before collapsing into bed. She slept for 14 hours straight and woke up disoriented, her body aching like she'd been beaten. Downstairs, she found Caleb in the kitchen making breakfast while Ivy slept in her basket. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "She ate," he said when he saw Eliza. "About an hour ago. Kept it all down. Agnes was here already. Said she's going to be fine." Eliza sagged against the doorframe. "Thank goodness." "Sit. I made eggs." She sat. Caleb put a plate in front of her with more food than she could possibly eat. Eggs, bacon, bread, even some of the preserves they'd been saving. He sat across from her with his own plate and they ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. "I've been thinking," Caleb said finally. "About what?" "About this." He gestured vaguely between them. "Us. This marriage." Eliza's stomach dropped. "What about it?" "It's not what either of us planned. We did it for practical reasons. To protect you from gossip, to give you legal standing, to make the town shut up about impropriety." He set down his fork. "But over the past few weeks, I've realized something." "What?" "I like being married to you." Eliza blinked. "What?" "I like coming home and having someone to talk to. I like working the ranch with a partner instead of alone. I like watching you with Ivy. I like—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "I like you. As a person. As my wife." Heat flooded Eliza's face. "Oh. I know we said this was just on paper, that nothing had to change. But I wanted you to know that if you ever wanted—" He struggled for words. "If you ever wanted this to be more than a business arrangement, I'd be open to that." Eliza stared at him. This man who'd been a stranger 8 weeks ago, who'd begged her to help his dying daughter, who'd defended her against his ranch hands and the entire town, who'd married her in a courthouse to give her protection and status, who was now sitting across from her saying he wanted more. "I don't know how to be someone's wife," she said quietly. "I was married before, but I was terrible at it. My husband barely tolerated me by the end. I'm not good at—" She gestured helplessly. "At any of this." "You're good at the parts that matter." Caleb leaned forward. "You're good at showing up, at working hard, at caring about things beyond yourself. That's more than most people manage. You don't know me well enough to say that. I've lived with you for 2 months. Watched you transform a dying ranch into something functional. Watched you save my daughter twice. Watched you stand up to the entire town without flinching. His expression was earnest. I know you well enough. Eliza's throat felt tight. What are you asking? I'm asking if you want this marriage to be real. Not just legal protection. Actually real. He reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. I'm asking if you'd consider being my wife in every way that matters. I'm already feeding your daughter and running your house. What else is there? This. He closed the distance, his hand covering hers, touching without asking permission first. Sitting together in the evening because we want to, not because we're both too tired to go upstairs. Sharing things beyond just work and Ivy. Caleb, I know I'm not what you would have chosen if you had better options. I know I've got a temper and a history and a ranch that's barely surviving, but I can promise you this, I will never take you for granted, never make you feel small, never stop being grateful that you said yes when everyone else said no. It was the longest speech she'd ever heard him make, the most honest. And it terrified her because she wanted to say yes, wanted to lean into this offered warmth and let herself believe it could last. But she'd believed that before. With her first husband, who'd married her and then spent 3 years regretting it. She'd seen the way his eyes had wandered to prettier women, had heard the disappointment in his voice when he talked about her, had felt herself becoming smaller and smaller until there was almost nothing left. What if you change your mind? She asked quietly. What if 6 months from now you realize you're stuck with someone you don't actually want? What if I don't? Caleb's thumb moved gently across her knuckles. What if we build something good here? What if we're actually happy? People like me don't get happy. Who told you that? Everyone. The whole world. Eliza pulled her hand back. I'm not the kind of woman men want, Caleb. I'm too big, too plain, too... Stop! His voice was sharp enough to cut her off. Don't do that. Don't repeat what those people said about you like it's truth. It is truth. Look at me. I am looking at you. He stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. I'm looking at the woman who saved my daughter, who transformed my disaster of a house into a home, who stands up to bullies without flinching, who works harder than anyone I've ever known. That's what I see when I look at you. That's not what everyone else sees. I don't care what everyone else sees. He took both her hands now, holding them firmly. I care what I see, and I see someone worth building a life with. Tears were sliding down Eliza's face before she could stop them. You don't know what you're offering. Yes, I do. I'm offering a real marriage to a woman I respect and care about. I'm offering partnership and companionship and maybe, eventually, something like love if we're lucky. He squeezed her hands. What are you so afraid of? That you'll wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake staying married to me? What if my temper gets worse? What if I turn into my father and start breaking things when I'm angry? What if... You won't. Eliza cut him off. You're nothing like that. How do you know? Because I've seen you angry. I've seen you lose your temper. And even at your worst, you've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. You've never taken your anger out on someone weaker. You've never... She stopped. You're a good man, Caleb, even if you don't believe it. He stared at her. Then believe I'm telling you the truth when I say I want this marriage to be real. Believe that I see you clearly and still want you. Believe that you're worth more than what those people in town think. It was the hardest thing she'd ever had to do. Believing she was wanted. Believing she deserved good things. Believing that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But she looked at Caleb kneeling beside her chair with hope in his eyes, and she wanted to try. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, we'll try. A real marriage. She took a shaky breath, but slowly. I need time to trust this. As slow as you need. He stood up, pulling her with him, and then very carefully put his arms around her. Is this okay? Eliza nodded against his chest. His shirt smelled like wood smoke and horse, and something distinctly him. His arms were solid and warm, and made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, until Ivy started fussing from her basket. Caleb pulled back with a slight smile. She's got timing. She always does. Eliza went to pick up the baby, who immediately stopped fussing and started rooting around for food. Hungry again. Good sign. Very good sign. Caleb watched her settle into the rocking chair with Ivy. I need to check the south fence. There's been cattle getting through. Go. We'll be fine. He hesitated at the door. Eliza? Yeah? Thank you for saying yes to all of it. He left before she could respond. The weeks that followed were strange and tentative, and surprisingly good. Caleb started sitting closer to her during meals, started touching her hand when he passed her things, started smiling more, the hard lines of his face softening into something almost gentle. Eliza started letting him help with Ivy more, started asking his opinion on house decisions instead of just making them herself, started believing, slowly, that he actually wanted her there. They still slept in separate rooms. That felt like a bridge neither of them was ready to cross yet. But sometimes in the evening, they'd sit together on the porch with Ivy between them, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, and it felt like maybe they were building towards something real. The ranch thrived. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat. The cattle fattened up on good grazing land. The chickens laid eggs like it was their purpose in life. Everything Eliza and Caleb touched seemed to grow. People from Black Hollow started coming around more, not to judge anymore, but to buy eggs and vegetables, and sometimes ask advice about their own struggles. They were cautious at first, testing whether the Mercers would welcome them after everything that had happened. Eliza was surprised to find she could be gracious, could sell them eggs without throwing their past cruelty in their faces, could make small talk about weather and recipes without feeling the old familiar shame. She was healing. So was Caleb. One evening, about 2 months after Ivy's illness, Eliza found him in the barn, standing in front of Sarah's photograph. He'd moved it out there weeks ago, unable to have it in the house, but unwilling to throw it away completely. "You okay?" Eliza asked quietly from the doorway. He turned, looking caught. "Yeah, just thinking." "About Sarah? About how different everything is now." He gestured at the photograph. "When she was alive, I was angry all the time. About money, about the ranch failing, about not being good enough. I took it out on her even though none of it was her fault." Caleb: "Oh, no, it's true. I was a terrible husband, short-tempered, demanding, always focused on work instead of her. By the time she got pregnant, we barely talked anymore except to argue." He looked at Eliza. "I killed our marriage long before she died." "You didn't kill her." "I didn't save her either." His voice was flat. "Doc wouldn't come because of my temper, because I couldn't control myself long enough to keep my mouth shut and my fists down. So yeah, maybe I didn't pull a trigger, but I'm still responsible." Eliza crossed the barn to stand beside him. "You can't change what happened. You can only decide what you do now." "I know. That's why—" He stopped. "That's why I'm trying to be different with you. Better. But I'm scared I'll mess it up, that I'll fall back into old patterns and hurt you the way I hurt her. You're not the same person you were then." "How do you know?" "Because that person wouldn't have asked me what I wanted, wouldn't have given me time, wouldn't have—" She touched his arm. "Wouldn't have seen me as an actual person worth considering." He covered her hand with his. "I do see you. I see you so clearly it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I don't deserve you," said simply, like stating fact. "You saved my daughter and my ranch and probably my sanity. What have I given you except a hard life in a town full of people who hate you?" "You've given me a home," Eliza said quietly. "A purpose. A family." She squeezed his arm. "You've given me Ivy. She's as much yours as mine now." "I know." Eliza looked at the photograph of Sarah. "Do you think she'd be angry? About us?" Caleb considered. "I think she'd be relieved. She wanted Ivy to have a mother, wanted this ranch to succeed, wanted me to be happy even though I made it impossible." He turned to face Eliza fully. "She was a good person married to someone who didn't appreciate her. You're a good person married to someone who's trying very hard to appreciate you. That's the difference. You do appreciate me. Every day." He pulled her closer, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. "Can I kiss you? Properly. I mean, not like the courthouse." Eliza's heart kicked up. "Yes." He kissed her carefully, like she was something precious that might break. His hands framed her face gently. His mouth was warm and slightly uncertain, like he was out of practice at this kind of tenderness. When he pulled back, his eyes were searching hers. "Was that okay?" "Yes." Her voice came out breathless. "That was... yes." He smiled, actually smiled, wide and genuine and so rare that Eliza's chest ached with it. "Good. Because I'd like to do it again sometime." "Okay. Okay." He kissed her forehead. We should get back to the house. Ivy's probably wondering where we went. They walked back together, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Eliza looked up at the stars beginning to appear and thought about how strange life was. How you could lose everything and find something better in the rubble. How the worst day of your life could lead directly to the best decision you ever made. She'd come to this ranch to feed a dying baby and had somehow ended up with a family. Inside the house, Ivy was indeed fussing. Eliza picked her up and the baby immediately calmed, recognizing her touch, her smell, her presence. 6 months old now and thriving. Fat cheeks and bright eyes and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. "Mama," Ivy babbled, the word formless but intentional. Eliza's breath caught. "Did she just—" "She's been trying to say it all week," Caleb said, grinning. "Guess she finally figured it out." "Mama?" Ivy said again, reaching for Eliza's face with chubby hands. Eliza looked at Caleb with tears in her eyes. "She called me Mama." "That's because you are." He wrapped his arms around both of them. "You're her mama in every way that counts." The three of them stood there in the kitchen that had gone from disaster zone to warm gathering place. Outside, the ranch spread out in the darkness, fences mended, garden growing, livestock fed and safe. A place that had been dying was now alive again, all because a desperate man had asked for help and a grieving woman had said yes. That night, after Ivy was asleep and the house was quiet, Eliza knocked on Caleb's door. He opened it, looking surprised. "Everything okay?" "I don't want separate rooms anymore," she said. His expression shifted. "Eliza, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She took a breath. "I want a real marriage. All of it. I'm tired of being afraid." "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure I want to try." She reached for his hand. "Can we try?" He pulled her into his room and closed the door behind her. "Yeah, we can try." What happened next wasn't perfect. It was awkward and uncertain, and both of them were clearly out of practice at intimacy. But it was also gentle and patient and filled with the kind of tenderness that comes from actually caring about the person you're with. Afterward, lying in Caleb's bed with his arm around her, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Wanted. Home. "I love you," Caleb said quietly into the darkness. Eliza's breath hitched. "What?" "I love you. I should have said it before, but I was scared you'd think I was just saying it because we're married. But I do. Love you. As a person. As my wife. As Ivy's mother." He pulled her closer. "You don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." Eliza thought about the past few months. Thought about how Caleb had defended her, protected her, valued her. Thought about the way he looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. Thought about how he'd given her everything she'd thought was impossible. "I love you too," she said. And she did. The seasons changed. Winter came and went. Spring brought new calves and fresh vegetables. Summer saw the ranch producing more than it ever had. By the time fall arrived again, Mercer Ranch was one of the most successful in the valley. People who'd once mocked Eliza now came to her for advice. Women who'd called her cursed now asked her opinion on raising babies. Men who'd laughed at Caleb's marriage now envied it. The change wasn't because Eliza and Caleb had suddenly become different people. It was because they'd stopped caring what everyone else thought and focused on building something real. Agnes visited regularly, her hip finally bad enough that she'd started training Eliza to take over some of her healing work. "You've got good hands," the old woman said. "Good instincts. This valley needs someone who knows what they're doing." Martha Drummond even apologized once, awkwardly, standing on the porch with a basket of preserves she'd made. "I was wrong about you," she said, "about this whole situation. I'm sorry." Eliza accepted the apology and the preserves. Forgiveness came easier when you were happy. One evening in late October, Eliza stood on the porch watching Caleb play with Ivy in the yard. The baby was walking now, stumbling on chubby legs while her father encouraged her. She'd fall and he'd pick her up, kiss her forehead, set her down to try again. Eliza's hand drifted to her stomach, to the small swell that was just starting to show. She hadn't told Caleb yet, wanted to wait until she was sure, wanted to savor this secret for a little while longer. A new baby. Their baby. The family expanding in ways neither of them had planned for. She was terrified. She was also happier than she'd ever been. Caleb looked up and caught her watching. He grinned and waved, and Eliza waved back, feeling her chest expand with something that might have been joy, or might have been gratitude, or might have been both. She thought about this day in the market when Caleb had appeared with a dying baby, thought about how close she'd come to saying no, to protecting herself, to staying invisible. If she had, she'd still be in that attic room, still selling bread to people who didn't see her, still believing she was unworthy of love or family or home. Instead, she was here, on a thriving ranch with a husband who valued her and a daughter who called her mama, and another child growing inside her. She was everything the town had said she'd never be, and she'd gotten here by saying yes when everyone else said no. Caleb carried Ivy up to the porch, both of them laughing. "She almost made it to the fence that time," he said proudly. "She's getting fast. Too fast. Soon we won't be able to catch her." He kissed Eliza's cheek. "You okay? You've been quiet today." "I'm pregnant," she said. The words just came out. No planning, no careful delivery, just truth. Caleb froze. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months. I wasn't sure until last week when Agnes confirmed it, but..." She stopped. "Are you okay?" He set Ivy down carefully, then pulled Eliza into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm better than okay. His voice broke. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," she agreed. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes wet. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Me too." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." Ivy tugged on Eliza's skirt, wanting attention. Eliza picked her up and held her while Caleb wrapped his arms around them both. Their family. Imperfect and hard-won and more valuable than anything either of them had ever imagined. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold. The ranch spread out below them, solid and thriving. The kind of place that could withstand winters and droughts, and whatever else the frontier threw at it. The kind of place built by two people who'd been broken separately and somehow made each other whole. Eliza looked at Caleb over Ivy's head and saw her future written in his eyes. More children, more seasons, more work and struggle and joy. A life worth living. "I'm glad I said yes," she said quietly. "To what?" "To everything. The baby, the ranch, you. All of it." Caleb smiled. "I'm glad you said yes too." They stood there together as darkness fell. A family that shouldn't have existed but did anyway, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the choices you make when you're desperate and the people you help when everyone else walks away. The widow nobody wanted had become the woman everyone needed. The rancher everyone feared had become the husband everyone envied. And the baby who should have died became the center of a family strong enough to survive anything. That was worth more than respect or reputation or anything else Black Hollow could offer. That was worth everything.